Manager was planning on being, or the mayor was planning on being here, I'm not sure. It will not.
So we gotta do a little switch.
Aim it towards me, talk loud. Got a lot of projection.
Okay.
I've decided I'll do it for the next few months. Bags of dirt.
I wonder if you might talk to people who are doing the major construction.
You guys want to take sign in for me? We sign in. Is more of this.
That, they didn't get that.
Yeah, I lived in Saudi for 4.5 years. It was, much of the richest these days and also. One year, you know, thank you very much.
But if I turn around, I'll never have that. You're in a good spot.
Yeah. The anticipation is killing me.
I'm killing it.
Like that was where it was.
But before. It was.
Well, that was.
Then. I used to have my driveway that I tell you. My driveway. Straight. And I had 5.
All right, good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We have shortly after 6, so we're hoping to get this started this evening. Thank you all for coming. All right, this is our second and final public outreach meeting for the Village of Biscayne Park's vulnerability assessment. As just Quick reminder, the vulnerability assessment is looking at the areas of Biscayne Park that are most prone to flooding, the severity of that flooding, also looking at future states, future situations such as the 100-year storms and storm surge and sea level rise. The purpose of the study is to assess where we are the most vulnerable. The results of this study we can use to inform us as we look for mitigation strategies, as well as funding opportunities such as grants. So I have zero voice left. I'm just going to hand it off to Kimley Horn.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Just checking. Hello, could everybody hear me? Okay, great. So again, my name is Alejandro Toral with, and this is my partner Alicia Cerisi with Kimley Horn and Associates. We're the consultant team in charge of the vulnerability assessment, and we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about what we've been doing over the past 6 to 8 months as far as this project. So a little bit of an introduction, and Chris kind of outlined it as well. This is a grant-funded project with under the Florida Resilient Program. This is FDEP funded. The point of this project, or the objective, is to identify what potential flood risks there are within the village of Biscayne Park. These flood risks could be due to rainfall, storm surge, or even sea level rise. So what we're going to do here is basically outline some of the work that we've been doing to flood map some of these potential flooding events, determine what critical assets are vulnerable, critical assets that are owned and maintained by the village. These critical assets are very important for the function of the village and to be able to service you all. So going on into it, this is achieved by, number one, identifying the different types of flood depths for various scenarios. We'll go into a couple of those scenarios here on, and then evaluate the flood severity. So how much is it flooding by? What is the depth of flooding in certain areas? Once we identify or evaluate the flood severity for each of these scenarios, we'll move into assessing the level of risk to the vulnerable assets. Those vulnerable assets could be anything from roads, the police station. These are, again, owned and maintained by the village. Then moving on into the identification of focus areas. This is where we look at areas that are at most risk by these flooding events, and then we'll go ahead and move on into a final vulnerability assessment. So Alicia is going to go ahead and discuss a little bit more into the specifics of what we've been doing to evaluate the different flood scenarios, the focus areas, and what are the next steps. And just before we get into it, I just want to make sure that everybody holds their questions towards the end of the presentation, because there's a lot of information that we need to get through, and if we need extra time, we'll be here after the presentation to talk to you guys. So with that, I'll leave it to Alicia to go ahead and discuss the project in its entirety.
Chris, can I take the mic off of here? All right, here we go. Okay, so really quickly, this is sort of an outline of these FDEP. Because it's a grant-funded project, we have very specific boxes that we have to check when it comes to the tasks that we're doing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a little bit of an outline of what we've already done. Oh, the poster. Absolutely. No problem. Yeah, sorry, guys. There we go. Better? Yeah. Okay. Excellent. 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 So again, I'm going to kind of breeze through what we did here, give a little bit of an outline, but the ultimate goal today is to talk about the results of this and where do we go from here? Because ultimately we recognize that you all want solutions to the flooding problems here, and that's the goal. So as Alejandro was saying, we do kind of a 3-step analysis, and then the 2 steps at the end, those identify focus areas, and the final vulnerability assessment and report is that planning structure that allows us to talk about next steps going forward, figure out where we can find some of those funding mechanisms to pay for projects that actually put structures in the ground for you all. So in the exposure analysis, we basically built a pretty simplified model for this scale of a project to say, where does it flood? Okay. I know you all know a lot of the city floods. So we will be showing that in some of these modeling results. And then after that, we go ahead and look at the sensitivity analysis. When we say sensitivity, we're talking about the city-owned systems and how sensitive they are to different threats coming from, specifically in this project, rainfall, storm surge, those kind of events. So I'll have you hit the next slide for me. We are now on, after this meeting, the identify focus areas task. So we've basically completed all of the flood depths, the sensitivity, and now we kind of get information, take a look at all the pieces of the puzzle together and come up with a logical next step. So we actually started in the last public outreach meeting that I would assume some of you all participated in. We started collecting flood complaints. We had sticker boards where you came around and you put stickers on the map. We put all those together digitally, and we also collected flood complaints for the last 2 months. Luckily, we had like a really big rain event. So you guys had an opportunity to give feedback on that and actually get an idea of where the extreme flooding was happening. And that is still open for the next, is it week? Till the end of this week. So if y'all have any other information that is not on this map, which I will put back up at the end, feel free to go ahead and upload some information to that as well. So once we had the flooding complaints and looked at ideas of locations around the city, we were going to compare that. I'm gonna wait for the picture to change the slide. Okay. We compared it to the topography of the city. So we know a lot of Miami-Dade County is really low lying, right? Okay, so this is what it actually looks like, all right? You'll notice, and I'm gonna come over here. On this side over here, we've got a really big bounding ridge. This is North Miami on this side, is that right? On this side. Unincorporated, okay, so we've got huge ridge on this side. We've got smaller ridge on this side. And what happens? All the water is going to get stuck in the middle, right? That's really what we can expect here when we're looking at this. And I actually went ahead and I pulled the elevations of some of those ridges are up to 25 feet in elevation. And the average elevation in Biscayne Park is between 3 feet on the low side and 6 feet. So we're not going to have water naturally moving uphill. It just doesn't do that, right? So what we're going to expect is a lot of standing water in the middle and also a lot of flooding. Now, this is outside of Biscayne Park, but kind of coming over the other side of the canal as well. So with that, before we change the slide, I'm going to preface this with the storm event that you all experienced back in June. I took a look at it because we are more industry standard. We look at what's called a 100-year storm event. That's a really extreme event that takes place. It has a 1% chance of occurring every year. We recognize that storm intensification is changing that number. We fully know that. But what you all experienced in June, that one-day event, was between 6 and 8 inches of rain in that neighborhood. The 100-year event is 15 inches of rain. So what we're going to model here and what we're going to show is a really extreme scenario compared to what you all might experience on an individual year or an extreme year. And I also, on the boards that I'll flip over, I put up some other statistics on, I know last year was pretty anomalous, like a lot of rain. Put that up on those boards too to kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at. So with that, I'll have you go ahead and flip this. So if we drop 15 inches of rain, can I have you hold until the end? I promise I'll come back. If we hit 15 inches of rain on Biscayne Park, this is what it's going to look like. Oh, there we go. So this is a lot of standing water, which you all have experienced. Kind of what we're getting from the flood complaints is really validating this model. Couple of other little asterisks here. With this model, this does not have any stormwater infrastructure in it whatsoever. There is not a single pipe in this modeled result. That would be a much more in-depth look at the city and a more expensive analysis, truthfully, that would be more geared towards predicting whether or not solutions can work. That would be more of like a stormwater master plan. This is just where does the water go and identifying the lowest lying, most vulnerable areas in the city. So keeping that in mind, it's a lot of water and there are no pipes moving it anywhere. This is where it would fall. And I think we all kind of know these certain areas. We compared them to where we were getting flood complaints and we were seeing the most extreme flooding kind of lining up with that. So that made sense. The next storm event we looked at was an even higher storm event. Now, this is a requirement of FDEP. This is a 500-year storm event. It has a 0.2% chance of happening in a given year. Okay, so I'll put that asterisk on it, and then I'll say that Fort Lauderdale experienced a 1,000-year storm event a couple years ago, so we know that this is possible. Taking a look at the 500-year, we go from that number in there, and you'll see it on the boards because it'll be a little easier to read, but it says somewhere between 10 and 11 feet of water. That's not accurate. That's what's happening inside the canal. Those numbers are not super relevant. In the 100-year storm event, we were seeing between 1 and 2 feet of water. In the 500-year storm event, we're seeing between 2 to like 5 feet of water in the most extreme areas, in the super low-lying areas. And the last event that I wanted to share with you all, although we looked at some other ones, they were kind of similar. The highlights here is the storm surge event. So the storm surge event is a very similar to what we would have if we had like a Category 3 hurricane push a whole lot of water in from the coast, okay? Where the hurricane hits makes it variable, how much water we have. So we use a statistical analysis to pick out how much water we're looking at. And so we get what's a 1% storm surge event. Again, very extreme event. And you'll notice in this that was actually in this north corner up here, there's less flooding than in the rainfall events because all the water actually pushes up the canal. And so it has a harder time getting over there. It has to travel over the ground. All right, so once we finish the exposure analysis, and I know this is what everyone's interested in, I'm going to just talk really quickly about the sensitivity analysis. This was a look at city-owned assets only. All of those pieces in red were identified as highly vulnerable to this specific event. This is the 100-year rainfall event. Again, we're in Village Hall right now. It's pretty close to the canal, so that's going to be in a high-risk area. We know it's a high-risk area. And we have certain roadway intersections, the Public Works building, kind of looking at what's vulnerable, what's not vulnerable here. It was pretty flooded. We do have, when we were looking at buildings, the way that we define if it's high level of criticality is, did the water surpass that finished floor elevation? I heard somebody saying earlier there was water in the garage. That means water has passed the finished floor elevation. It's above the concrete slab that the building is built on top of. So that's anything red here. Either it's a roadway and it was above the crown of the road, or it was a building and we're above that finished floor elevation. So that's kind of what we're looking at there. And I included these results, but I'm going to I know this is more or less, we'll just kind of skim through these a little bit. That's the 100-year. Obviously, we get more in the 500-year. And the storm surge event, again, we kind of see from the canal pushing outward. That's sort of the trend on that one. So with all of that, I want to talk about what happens next on this project and what typically happens after these kind of projects are wrapped and the directions that cities tend to go in. So first off, we need to identify the focus areas in the city and we need to define them for FDEP for this project. This has two benefits to it. One is the city can identify areas where they're going to spend money, right? We do not have all of the money in the world to mitigate problems. We need to find the areas, the low-hanging fruit, if you will, where we have solutions that work for the most amount of people. The other thing is that specifically, this program that we're doing this project under is a grant-funded program that has millions of dollars coming available for implementation grants. That would be, implementation is just putting a structure in the ground. So in order to qualify for that money, to apply for that money, you have to do this project. That's the primary goal of this project, is to qualify to apply for those grants and start working on those projects. And we want to show a high level of vulnerability for the city because that gives that justification when we're looking for those funding, like, hey, we have a lot of flooding, we should qualify for this funds. So we're going to go through and we'll work with the city. We don't do this in a black box. That's why we're here getting everybody's feedback. We don't live in Biscayne Park. We live in Miami, and I actually live in St. Petersburg, Florida. But we know people here in the community know this area very well. And so we want to work together as a team to identify those focus areas that will best serve you all. So this is an example of a project I worked on for the city of North Miami Beach. Again, I can come back to this and when you guys can come up to the screen a little bit. But if you look in pink, we actually outlined 6 target areas, 2 of which are repeat loss locations where the city can then go through and say, hey, we want to put a project here. They can start working on the project, and then along the way, they can apply for those implementation grants and have a better likelihood of getting that funding. And that's not the only grant available, obviously, but this gives you that justification to say, hey, we know this is an issue. We would like to get that funding. So this is what we're going to work on next, and we're going to incorporate the feedback, what the city has to say, any upcoming projects that maybe we want to kind of apply for those grants under as well, and put this together. And then finally, we will package it all up and publish it in a vulnerability assessment. So the key thing here is that this project is only meant to assess vulnerability. We want to look at what is vulnerable. We do not, in this project, come up with solutions. This is where we say, here's where we need to focus our efforts. It's a planning effort. The next step after this would be to find, projects that we want to work on, likely a more in-depth, again, planning project where we build out all the pipes, either a stormwater plan or an adaptation plan, something that gives the milestones along the way that the city can do to kind of keep chugging along and keep solving those issues. So with that, I am going to throw one other thing up, and I'll flip one of the boards. We'll do a big reveal. We put together here, the city does have some roadway and drainage plans coming up, and some of them that have been completed. So we did put together a map showing where those locations are. These are up here by phase that we were given. This is in capital improvement plans. So you definitely want to come and take a look here and note that this is where the roads are going to be resurfaced and where drainage is going to go in. This is the game plan as it stands right now. The rest of these are going to be closer looks at those exposure maps that I showed. So I think I'm just going to, with that, maybe put these up and ask if anybody has any questions.
The study, just because it's based at the city, and we have a county road that runs through the city,
Mhm.
is there vulnerability aspects that tie in for emergency routing as well? Being that Griffin Boulevard is unincorporated Dade County police route, it's also emergency services route for ambulance and fire. Do you take in the credibility of that as well?
Yes, we actually did. I'm really glad you brought that up. So this is a discussion we have on early on in all these projects. A lot of cities that they say, oh, it says it's just for city-owned things. We can't include that. And the answer is, yes, we absolutely can, and we do. So we did an intersection analysis, and Griffin, I think there were 5 or 6 intersections along that were included in the analysis. They're not shown on this map, but if you look, any of the roadways in yellow were assessed because of that reason, that they're emergency evacuation routes that the fire department takes, et cetera. Yeah.
Pipes that were put in the ground are actually on hydrant. It's amazing to me, and I complained about it at the time, that they didn't put where the flooding was occurring, and they didn't put it at low ground. They put drains that, of course, didn't take in much water, because they put them at high ground. On 10th Avenue and 113th Street is a prime example. On 9th and 113th Street, we had flooding. But on 10th and 114th and 113th Street, when they put the new drainage in the ground, and even though I complained enough that they lowered it 2 inches, it still was high enough ground to take water. I mean,
Matt, with that, you told me before that some of the drains are just French drains. They're just all.
They're all
so
French
all-
drains.
So
They are all
we
French
have to put
drains,
in the
but-
water table that's there. I
but-
don't really.
but- But if the water is down that end of the
Oh,
block,
I
and
agree.
the drainage is to this end of the block,
Logic,
it makes no sense.
100%.
At our house too, don't worry, we have like no drainage at all.
Yeah.
They put it in the wrong spot.
So like Griffin, so I've had over $500,000 in damage, and I've lived here since
2020, moved in February 2022, we had our first major loss, interior flood damage in June, and our second in November, and then our third just passed. So,
in next to the church, Peter and Dora's old house.
and I'm an attorney, and I know that through my research from putting the county on notice, I had an engineer come out and he told me that he believed that the grading was too high on the street. And then it was confirmed that the fact that they actually completed that roadway project, regrading our street in
Yeah.
February 2020.
So from Northeast 7th all the way through to the Griffin intersection here, they did a repaving project that finished in 2021. If you
February 2022.
Two, and then if you go back, and I pulled all the as-bills, and then I paid a surveyor, and I've also shot it the laser, and I did a GPR license as well. So I have all that. What ended up happening was, so I talked to the previous owner for 27 years. My property is a full-facing property, so the water sheds, it's 26,000 square feet, and it sheds through me. And when they built that up, it's created a dam, and I've had up to 4 2.5 feet of it is in a crawl space, but I have to replace all my bearers and joists.
Our house is basically collapsing.
And it's falling in on itself, and I have a court order from the insurance company saying I can't touch it. And it continues to happen. I've reached out to the city numerous times, and I get told, oh, it's a county road. And there's nothing that they can do, but the issue is the original grade level and a resurfacing project shouldn't raise the continuum off the road. So at that point, the way I do it, I do construction litigation all the time, is that that's a defect, and it's a county defect, and every one of the council people and the previous city manager have all been put on alert to it. They just kick the butt. But it's creating a dam, to your point before, that you've got two entry levels of a higher valley. And it's doing that on everyone's properties at that point. What I'm concerned about, and I think there should be some consultation in what the vulnerability study is versus also what we're doing with the repaving projects that are here, is that is the city going back and doing checking and making sure that there's the RL levels are actual to what the civil engineer expect it to be. What are we doing to be able, I get we've got to start raising things, but you can't raise a road and have a property that's sat there before the road and then create a dam that's now then flooding a property because there's nowhere for the water to go. So I didn't know about this whole thing until about 2 weeks ago, and my wife put it on my calendar. So I haven't put any of the data in, but like, as I said, I've got over $600,000 worth of insurance claims that I'm literally now having to sue the insurance company because they're claiming there was no rain events in Biscayne Park on those days.
And I'll tell you that I'm an attorney for citizens, so I don't really make lawsuits lately. I don't really sue people. I only sue when it's a real issue. And I don't know, issue.
So the vulnerability study, what I want to just make sure with roofing is to take into, and I don't know if anyone's brought that up, but the grading, and I actually have the data. Kimberly Horn actually has a copy of it because she goes through all my civil work. So you guys actually have it because I had the civil team do some modeling for me. It's a problem, but it's not just me. It's just that I'm at the end, and it's compounded to
The
that.
farthest downstream.
And looking at grading analysis there, I can see where it's falling because, as you said, it's tracking upward now. So it's falling that way, and it all sits right at the edge of the church there. My property being in the middle, my neighbours and across the road as well. So I don't know if that's been captured where that is. So it's 6 out there. But 2.6 at the press route. Second, it's a contamination made by
It'd be good for us to get a hold of that information and potentially input it into this model.
Sure.
The topo that we use is from 2021, so it might not reflect the actual grading.
Yeah, you don't have the right type.
No, and
And it's
it was
great.
published 21. It was actually shot in 2019. So it takes, and
Talking like the press that sits in the middle versus where it was, it's like asinine what they're creating.
The prior owner preferred to give that better flood, a little water to my house.
And based on the scale of this modeling exercise, it'd be hard to really tie it into what you guys are seeing because of how large the scale is. It would take another engineering firm to really hone it in and be able to really tell you guys whether you guys are having an issue based on a grading condition.
I've already done that.
From pre to post
Yeah.
condition.
Yeah, I've already done it. I pulled all the analytical, I pulled probably the 2019 topo that you're talking about, if you pulled it off the NBC
Correct, yes.
GIS. So
Yeah,
I
and it was
did the
updated in
same one,
2021.
And I've done my own because they refused to be able to do as-built, which is a condition as part of the
Certification process.
the certification, and they've like legitimately failed multiple standards to be able to go and actually do their complete scope for it. So like, and they close the project out. So I have all that model, and I'd love to share it with you, but it shows a massive defunct and negligent aspect on Miami-Dade County that's compounding issues, and what that compounding is actually doing, it's also all up in where the police cars all parked. That was all flooded in the last event, and it's pushing all that water because I'm at the crown basically there, and it's sitting, and then it slowly falls back that way, and it's sitting all down here at that point, a major intersection that exists there, and I get it's not major everywhere else, but for us, it's our major intersection. It's an issue. So.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I mean, what I would ask is that you share that information, or at least a contact at Kinley Horn
Sure.
that can share that information with us, and we'll definitely include it in the final vulnerability assessment. There's still one more step until we finalize this study, and then we could go ahead and take a look at how much of a severe change or any change at all it does to the result.
I appreciate that.
Mhm.
Thanks, guys.
I'm sorry, you said 4 feet of water?
4 feet of water.
Yeah, you said 10 to 15 in the max. I have, the water in my house, it was above my knee.
Mhm.
And fast.
7 and 21. I really appreciate studying them out.
And what we're seeing also is that it takes a long time to draw down as well, and that has to do.
Yeah.
And I have the same problem with the.
That has to do with the geology, the types of soils that you guys have are not very conducive.
Well, and it's what it takes to sit.
Yeah.
And then also,
Yeah. So.
of course, and that's something that I would also like to add to this, is that our study does not take into account any percolation.
None of
or
it.
I kind of thought so with the way that the water holding map was, like,
Mhm.
percolation here is not a thing because, again, study, and like, even if you do a renovation or a new build on a house, if you look at bearing pressure of soil here and water mitigation quality that exists, it doesn't, it just holds.
Mhm.
Yes, two quick questions. On your map, like if you go to the left, or this blue, the ones that you're, there are areas that are like based off all in black and white. Where the blue, like over on the side.
Where?
So the lighter colors, the lighter blue colors are the lower inundation depths. The darker the blue is, the more inundation there is. So
Yeah,
if
the
you look
deeper
on
the water.
Black and
Like all along the east side, all on the red side and across the canal. There's some in Biscayne Park as well.
Right at the edge of it.
Those are the high areas that would not see the flooding from this particular event.
Oh, yeah, where all the water.
the high. That line up with the bridge. How do I pop it back up? Exactly.
You say that the ground.
Mhm. That so it's not fully 25 feet, but the max.
So the additional phases were identified as the next places to drop in French drains. That is not guaranteed. We're currently working with an engineering firm looking at different solutions. Our original stormwater management plan, based partly on the information that we've been receiving from the public through this process, is causing us to take a different or another closer look at those. Correct. The situation that Biscayne Park is in, the only place that we can drain is to the canal. And that's unfortunately not really an option from the perspective of cost as well as environmental. So we're looking at additional solutions. One of the things that the mayor and I and Director of Public Works were just discussing is, I'm going to get the word wrong, storm well drains, injection wells. Yeah, to drop that water down. I can jump in on that briefly. That's actually a great segue back to the purpose of this study. Once we have the engineering data that shows this is where Biscayne Park floods, we can get the same from El Portal, Miami Shores, North Miami. Then we have something concrete, concrete evidence and data that we can go to the county with and say, look, this is not a Biscayne Park 121st Street problem. This is going to require a larger solution. But that's why we need to complete things like the vulnerability assessment, so we have that data and have the ability to do that.
is to say it might be better suited to apply for lower hanging fruit. This level of model not believe could be used because of the fact that we did not analyze any infrastructure. I think that that would likely disqualify this study and this what.
Yeah, that's something we can definitely look into, for the scope of this project. It's beyond the scope, but that's definitely something we can look into. Yeah, it's a sanitary sewer. I'll chime in, again, that's beyond the scope of this particular project, but that is something we're already working on. Right along 121st, I think there are 8. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I can't speak. And those are solutions we're hoping to find and pay for using this data. Could be because you have a new manager here that takes this seriously. I'm not sure. Mario laid a lot of groundwork. Yep.
And Mario actually has.
Yep.
County does have their own benefit perspective, and because those. Not that we're not thinking. Yeah.
I can jump in on this real quick. From the perspective of funding and action, those are two totally different things. We focus with this study, we focus on the flooding events, the rainwater and everything else. Yes, we are on septic. Yes, that presents additional issues. But that's a separate, that's looked at separately from the larger state and county perspective. Correct.
But I will say that the level of detail of that analysis, you have to get all of the different ground elevations, every single type and every single type size, and run the stormwater modeling along with it, with those types, and see what's happening on the groundwater levels. It's a much more detailed analysis that tends to exist at a site-specific scale versus a municipal scale. So if that were a project that they were going to queue up in the future, it would likely be along a specific roadway, not municipal wide. That would be very challenging. Yeah.
And then just a final thought on the septic issue. We can absolutely convert the entire village to a sewer system. All we have to do is come up with about $70,000 per resident. And then we're good. So we're looking at potential options. I think for the short term, the solution is, or the solutions that we're looking for are what can we do to eliminate or mitigate some of this flooding so we don't run into the situations where septic is starting to bubble up. So we are looking at different funding options that's coming from the state level for something that big. But for the vulnerability assessment, we want to get rid of this water. Those are French drain systems, yeah. So the original stormwater plan had us running outflow to the canal, which isn't an option. I don't know the engineering or the timing that went in behind these phases that was prior to my arrival. But those were the areas identified at that time that are the most at risk. The cool thing about this vulnerability assessment is this gives us actual data, an actual mapping, so that through that process, like was mentioned before, we can take a look at those phases and see, is this currently the best option? We're currently in the planning stages for what would be phase two. We're not looking at French drains for phase two. We're looking at that injection well. Yeah. In fact, the mayor and the director of public works and I were on a meeting 3 weeks ago, maybe, give or take, talking about different solutions. Yeah, I think I don't want to speak bad about these past projects. These are definitely designed to eliminate most of the flooding from large rain events. They're not capable of handling the major events.
Again, that 6 to 8 inches was one of those 3 days. I just pulled one. The rest of it required that. So I just said in the one day that we got the most intense rain, it was between 6 and 8 inches depending on rain. But there was more rain for that. Yeah. Bit about pump station and also about injection wells and fuel. There's a difference, and the biggest difference was cost. But also, a pump station takes water, moves it to another place, and here there is a big challenge with discharging to that canal. And does not like it. Very, very challenging for permitting and for that to happen. An injection well takes the water and pumps it deep down into the ground, which also provides water treatment as well. It's a much more expensive project. And so I think that that's kind of why it takes a long time to evaluate.
It's not only South Carolina.
Army Corps, yeah.
It's sensitive, very sensitive.